I still remember the exact moment my brother stole my company from me. Not because of what he said. Not because of the paperwork. But because of the way everyone in the room avoided looking at me afterward. You know that feeling when your whole life changes in a single second, and somehow the world keeps moving like nothing happened? That's what it felt like. One minute I was the founder of Carter Logistics, the company I spent 15 years building from nothing. The next minute, I was standing outside my own office carrying a cardboard box while employees whispered behind glass walls pretending not to stare. And the person responsible? My younger brother, Daniel. The same kid I protected growing up. The same kid I gave a job when nobody else believed in him. The same kid who looked me in the eyes and called me family while planning against me for years. Funny thing is, if you had met us back then, you probably would have liked Daniel more. Everybody did. He was charming, but confident. The kind of guy who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with everybody laughing 5 minutes later. I was the opposite. Quiet, focused, always working. While other people partied in their 20s, I was sleeping in warehouses and driving delivery trucks myself because I couldn't afford employees yet. Most people only saw the successful version later. The office. The contracts. The money. They didn't see the beginning. They didn't see me sitting in freezing storage buildings at 2 in the morning wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Back then, Carter Logistics wasn't a company. It was basically me, one old truck, and a tiny warehouse with a leaking roof. I remember those winters especially. The heater barely worked. I used to wear 2 jackets while doing paperwork because my hands would shake from the cold. But I loved it. That's the crazy part. Even when things were hard, I loved building something that belonged to me. Every new client felt like proof I was moving forward. Every small win mattered. And over time, slowly, painfully slowly, the company grew. 1 truck became 3. 3 became 8. Then employees came. Drivers. Managers. Warehouse workers. For the first time in my life, people depended on me. That pressure changes you. You stop thinking only about survival. You start thinking about responsibility. And somewhere during those early years, Daniel drifted through life. He jumped between jobs constantly. Sales 1 month. Real estate another. Then some online business idea that disappeared after 6 weeks. My parents worried about him all the time. Especially my mother. He just needs confidence, she used to say. But confidence isn't something people hand you. You build it by surviving difficult things. And Daniel hated difficult things. At least back then. I remember the night he first asked to join the company. We were sitting in a cheap diner near the warehouse after I finished a 16-hour shift. He looked exhausted. Defeated, honestly. I need a fresh start, he said quietly. I should have noticed something right there. Daniel almost never spoke quietly. But that night he did. And maybe that's why I trusted him immediately. He looked vulnerable. But like a younger brother finally asking for help. What exactly are you asking? I said. A real chance. I still remember staring at him across that table while rain hit the diner windows outside. Part of me hesitated. Mixing family and business is dangerous. Everybody says that. But he was my brother. And deep down, I wanted to believe helping him would bring us closer. So I gave him a position. Nothing huge at first. Basic operations. Client communication. Simple responsibilities. And honestly, at the beginning, he did well. Really well. Employees liked him immediately. Clients loved his energy. For the first time in years, Daniel actually seemed focused. Driven. My parents were thrilled. Especially my father. He started talking about the boys building something together. And I'll admit it, hearing that felt good. For a while, things actually worked. Daniel brought excitement into the company. I brought structure. Balance. At least that's what I thought. But looking back now, the warning signs were always there. I just ignored them. That's the dangerous thing about betrayal. Usually the clues appear long before the damage does. You just explain them away because trusting people feels easier than questioning them. At first, it was small things. Daniel loved attention. If a client complimented the company, he made sure people knew he handled the meeting. If profits increased, he talked like he personally carried the entire business. Meanwhile, I stayed in the background because honestly, I didn't care about recognition. I cared about results. That difference became important later. Very important. As the company expanded, Daniel became more involved in leadership meetings. And slowly, employees started gravitating toward him socially. Not professionally. Socially. There's a difference. People laughed harder around him. Relaxed more around him. He knew how to make employees feel emotionally connected. I respected that. What I didn't realize was that emotional influence can become dangerous when combined with insecurity. Around our 10th year in business, Carter Logistics exploded financially. Huge contracts. Regional expansion. New warehouses. We finally became the kind of company people respected publicly. And that's when everything changed. Because success affects insecure people differently. Some people become grateful. Others become obsessed. Daniel became obsessed. At first, it looked harmless. Better suits. More expensive watches. Luxury dinners with clients. He started talking constantly about image and influence. Perception matters, he'd say. And he wasn't wrong. But eventually perception became more important to him than substance. Meanwhile, I stayed focused on operations. Systems. Growth. Stability. I assumed we were still working toward the same goal. God, I was stupid. One night after a company event, I remember walking into the parking garage with Daniel. Employees had spent the entire evening praising the business. Congratulating us. Taking pictures. And suddenly Daniel said something strange. You know, people only really respect power, right? I laughed lightly. What does that mean? I'm serious, he said. Nobody cares about the guy doing paperwork in the background. I looked at him carefully. Somebody has to build the business. Yeah, he replied quietly. But somebody else gets remembered. That sentence stayed with me for days afterward. At the time, I thought he was just drunk. Looking back now, I think he was revealing exactly who he was becoming. Over the next 2 years, Daniel changed more and more. He became obsessed with status, titles, authority, public recognition. And slowly, he started pushing me out of visible leadership. Subtly at first. He'd volunteer for interviews before I could answer. Schedule meetings without telling me. Present ideas publicly as if they belonged to both of us equally. I ignored it. Because in my mind, we were family. I wasn't competing with my brother. I had no idea he was competing with me. That's the part people never understand about betrayal. The victim usually doesn't even realize there's a war happening. One afternoon, my assistant walked into my office looking nervous. There's a leadership meeting starting downstairs, she said. I frowned. What leadership meeting? Apparently Daniel had scheduled a major strategy discussion with department heads without informing me. At first I assumed it was a mistake. So I walked downstairs calmly expecting confusion. But the moment I entered that conference room, everything felt off. People avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped abruptly. And Daniel sat at the far end of the table wearing this strange expression I'd never seen before. Confidence mixed with tension. Like someone preparing for impact. You started without me? I asked. Daniel smiled thinly. Actually, Ethan, this meeting is about restructuring. That word immediately made my stomach tighten. Restructuring what? Nobody answered. Then a lawyer standing near the wall slid a folder across the table toward me. I remember staring at it for several seconds before opening it. Inside were documents. Ownership transfers. Executive authority changes. Board approvals. My signature appeared on multiple pages. I never signed them. At first my brain literally refused to process what I was seeing. I looked up slowly. What is this? Daniel folded his hands calmly. A necessary transition. My heart started pounding hard. You forged my signature? One of the lawyers cleared his throat carefully. The documents were legally processed through proper channels. Proper channels. Amazing how people use professional language to hide disgusting actions. I looked around the room again. Nobody moved. Nobody defended me. And that was the moment I realized something horrifying. This had been planned for a long time. Not days. Not weeks. Months. Maybe years. Daniel had spent years building loyalty inside the company while quietly isolating me. And I never noticed because I trusted him completely. You're serious? I whispered. Daniel leaned back slowly. You've been burned out for a long time, Ethan. Burned out. That's how he framed it. Like he was helping me. Saving the company from me. You stole my business. No, he replied calmly. I saved it. That sentence changed something inside me forever. Because for the first time, I saw the truth clearly. Daniel didn't think he was betraying me. He genuinely believed he deserved what I built. That level of entitlement is terrifying. I stood up so fast my chair nearly fell backward. This company exists because of me. And now it survives because of me, he snapped instantly. There was the resentment. Years of hidden jealousy finally showing itself openly. You think employees respected you? He continued. They respected the company, the brand, the success. I stared at him in disbelief. No apology. No shame. Just anger. Like I was the one who wronged him somehow. You planned this, I said quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then finally he said, I did what needed to be done. I wish I could tell you I fought harder in that moment. That I screamed, threatened lawsuits, flipped tables dramatically. But honestly, I was in shock. Real betrayal doesn't feel cinematic at first. It feels confusing. Your brain keeps searching for another explanation because the truth feels too ugly to accept immediately. The meeting ended quickly after that. Not because I agreed. Because the damage was already done. As I packed my office later that afternoon, employees kept walking past the glass walls pretending not to look inside. Some looked guilty. Others looked afraid. A few looked relieved. That part hurt too. Because while I was busy building a business, Daniel was busy building influence. And influence often beats integrity in the short term. I remember picking up an old framed photo from my desk while packing. It showed me and Daniel standing outside the original warehouse years earlier. Smiling. Covered in dirt after unloading trucks ourselves. Back then we looked like brothers. Real brothers. I almost left the picture behind. But at the last second, I put it inside the box anyway. Not because I wanted the memory. Because I needed proof that version of us actually existed once. As I walked toward the exit carrying that cardboard box, Daniel suddenly appeared near the front lobby. For a second neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, You'll thank me someday. I honestly think that hurt more than the betrayal itself. Because it revealed how deeply disconnected from reality he'd become. You destroyed this family, I said. No, he replied coldly. You just can't accept losing control. Control. That word echoed in my head the entire walk to my car. Even then, Daniel still framed everything as power. Not trust. Not loyalty. Power. And deep down, I think that's all he ever truly wanted. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the city lights through the window for what felt like hours. I didn't turn on the television. Didn't answer calls. Didn't even unpack the cardboard box sitting near the kitchen table. I just sat there trying to understand how 15 years of my life disappeared in one afternoon. People always talk about betrayal like it creates instant rage. But honestly, the first feeling was numbness. Pure numbness. Like my brain refused to accept reality completely. Every few minutes I kept thinking the same thing. This can't actually be happening. Daniel wouldn't do this. Not really. Then I'd remember the conference room. The forged documents. The way he looked at me while calmly justifying everything. And reality would hit all over again. Sometime after midnight, my phone finally rang. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Ethan, she asked softly. One word. That's all it took. The second I heard her voice, something inside me cracked emotionally. You knew. I asked quietly. Silence. And that silence told me everything. Not everything maybe, but enough. We thought you two were handling things privately, she said carefully. I laughed bitterly. Handling things? Honey. He stole my company. Her breathing became shaky immediately. Daniel said the business needed changes. Of course he did. Even now he was controlling the narrative, painting himself as the responsible one, the savior. That's the thing about manipulative people. They rarely present themselves as villains. They present themselves as necessary. You believe him? I asked. No, she whispered quickly. I don't understand how things got this bad. Neither did I. Or maybe I just didn't want to. After the call ended, I finally opened the cardboard box. Inside were pieces of my old life. Awards. Documents. Family photos. A coffee mug one of my employees gave me years earlier that said, "Built from nothing." That one hurt the most. Because it was true. I did build it from nothing. And somehow that made the betrayal feel even more personal. Around 3 in the morning, I drove to the old warehouse without thinking. Not the main headquarters. The original warehouse. The tiny place where everything started. The building was empty now except for storage equipment and unused shelves. I still had keys because technically the property remained under an older holding agreement outside the company. Funny how small details end up mattering later. The moment I walked inside, memories hit me hard. I could practically see younger versions of us everywhere. Me sleeping at the desk after overnight deliveries. Daniel helping unload inventory during his first weeks. Us arguing over cheap pizza while trying to solve payroll problems. Back then, we actually felt like a team. Or maybe I just wanted to believe we were. I sat alone on an old crate near the loading dock until sunrise wondering where everything went wrong. And slowly, painfully slowly, certain memories started replaying differently in my head. Moments I ignored. Comments I dismissed. Warning signs. Like the time Daniel got angry after a client specifically requested meeting with me instead of him. Or the night he drank too much at a company party and started ranting about people never getting enough credit. Back then I thought he was stressed. But I realized he was resentful. There's a difference. By morning, exhaustion finally hit me. I drove home, showered, and tried forcing myself to think logically. Maybe there was still a way to fight legally. Maybe the forged signatures could be challenged. Maybe employees would support me once they understood what happened. So I called a lawyer. Then another. And another. By the end of the day, reality became painfully clear. Daniel hadn't acted impulsively. He planned everything carefully. The paperwork trail was complicated. Authority transfers had already been processed through multiple channels. Several executives backed him officially. And worst of all, he'd slowly reduced my direct control over the previous year without me fully noticing. Every lawyer told me basically the same thing. You might eventually win parts of this legally, but it'll take years. Years. I remember hanging up the final call feeling completely hollow. Because lawsuits wouldn't save the company I built. Even if I won eventually, the business would already be transformed into something unrecognizable by then. And deep down, I think Daniel knew that. That's why he moved fast. Over the next week, the humiliation spread everywhere. Industry contacts started calling. Employees messaged awkwardly pretending concern. Rumors exploded online. Some people claimed I stepped down voluntarily. Others said I suffered a breakdown. One article even described Daniel as the visionary new leader modernizing the company. Visionary. That word almost made me throw my phone across the room. I stopped reading comments after that. There's something deeply painful about watching strangers discuss your life like entertainment, especially when half of them have no idea what actually happened. A few days later, Daniel called me directly. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But some stupid part of me still hoped there was a misunderstanding buried somewhere underneath all this. "Hey," he said casually. Casually. Like we were discussing weekend plans instead of betrayal. "What do you want?" "You've been talking to lawyers." I laughed coldly. "You forged documents, Daniel." "You're overreacting." That sentence honestly stunned me. Overreacting? He stole my company and somehow I was the emotional one. "You pushed me into this," he continued. I sat up immediately. "What does that even mean?" "You stopped listening years ago." There it was again. The justification. Manipulators love rewriting history because it protects them from guilt. You could have talked to me, I said quietly. I tried. No, you manipulated people behind my back. You left me no choice. I remember gripping the phone so tightly my hands started hurting. No choice. I repeated. For years I helped build that company while you acted like the only important person in the room. That accusation genuinely shocked me. Because if anything, I spent years avoiding attention. But perception matters more than reality to insecure people. Maybe every compliment I received felt like rejection to him. Maybe every success reminded him of his own insecurities. Nothing justified this. You destroyed everything, I whispered. No, he replied calmly. I finally took what should have been shared from the beginning. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended, because it revealed something dangerous. Daniel didn't think like a thief. He thought like someone correcting an injustice. And people who justify betrayal emotionally can become terrifying. That same week, my father asked to meet privately. We sat in silence at a small coffee shop near downtown while awkward music played overhead. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. I should have stepped in earlier, he admitted quietly. I stared at him carefully. How long did you know? His hesitation answered before his words did. Daniel talked to us months ago. Months. The betrayal somehow got worse every day. He said you were shutting him out, my father continued. That the company was becoming unstable. I laughed bitterly again. Daniel really built an entire narrative around me before making his move. Carefully. Strategically. He lied. I know that now. After the damage. That's another painful truth about betrayal. People often realize who the manipulator really is only after destruction becomes unavoidable. My father leaned forward slowly. You have to understand something about your brother. No, I interrupted immediately. I really don't. Silence fell between us again. Then he said something that bothered me deeply. He always felt overshadowed by you. Overshadowed. I hated that word instantly. Because I never tried to compete with Daniel. Never. But maybe competition doesn't require two willing participants. Maybe one-sided resentment is enough. I gave him opportunities, I said quietly. I know. I trusted him. I know. Then why does everybody keep explaining his feelings instead of his actions? That question hit hard enough that my father couldn't answer immediately. Because deep down, he knew I was right. There's a dangerous habit families develop sometimes. They protect the emotionally unstable person so long that accountability disappears completely. And without accountability, resentment grows unchecked. After leaving the coffee shop, I drove aimlessly around the city for hours. Everywhere I looked reminded me of the company. Trucks, clients, buildings we helped supply. It felt like pieces of my identity were scattered across the entire city. That's the dangerous thing about building something from scratch. Eventually it stops feeling like a business. It feels like part of you. And when someone steals it, the grief becomes personal. One evening, about 2 weeks after losing the company, I finally broke emotionally. Not publicly. Not dramatically. I was alone at home trying to cook dinner when I suddenly realized I didn't know who I was anymore without work. That thought terrified me. Because for 15 years, my entire identity revolved around Carter Logistics. Founder, builder, problem solver. Without the company, who was I? I sat on the kitchen floor for nearly an hour that night staring at nothing. And honestly, that moment scared me more than the betrayal itself. Because Daniel didn't just steal a business. He stole structure, purpose, routine, identity, at least temporarily. The next morning, I forced myself to go outside. No plan, just movement. I ended up near a small industrial district across town where new businesses rented cheap warehouse spaces. And weirdly enough, walking through those old streets reminded me of the early days again. Small companies, independent owners, people struggling to build something. No fake corporate image. No polished executives. Just work. Real work. For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides anger. Perspective. Maybe because deep down, I realized something important. Daniel stole the company. But he didn't steal the person who built it. That realization changed everything. Not instantly, not magically, but enough. Enough to make me think differently for the first time since the betrayal happened. A few days later, I met an old client named Richard for coffee. I honestly expected sympathy conversation and nothing more. Instead, halfway through the meeting, he leaned back and said, "So when are you starting again?" I frowned. "Starting what?" "A new company." I laughed quietly. "You think I'm ready for that?" Richard looked genuinely confused. "Ethan, you built a logistics empire from one truck." He shrugged casually. "Why couldn't you do it again?" That question stayed in my head the entire drive home. Why couldn't I? Fear immediately answered. Exhaustion. Humiliation. But underneath all that, another feeling slowly appeared. Determination. Not revenge. Not yet. Something quieter. The realization that maybe my story wasn't actually over. And maybe Daniel made one massive mistake. He thought stealing the company meant stealing the builder too. But those aren't the same thing at all. For the first time since losing the company, I woke up with something that almost felt like purpose again. Not happiness. Not peace. Just movement. And honestly, after weeks of feeling emotionally paralyzed, movement was enough. I started driving around the industrial side of the city every morning looking at empty warehouses and small office spaces. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. I wasn't trying to rebuild an empire. I just needed to feel useful again. That's something nobody tells you about losing everything. The hardest part isn't the money. It's waking up without direction. For years, every decision I made had meaning. Employees depended on me. Clients called me. Problems needed solving. Then suddenly, silence. No meetings. No emergencies. No reason to get out of bed early anymore. And silence can become dangerous if you stay inside it too long. About 3 weeks after Daniel took the company, I rented a tiny warehouse on the edge of town. Compared to Carter Logistics, the place looked pathetic. Small loading area. Cracked concrete floors. Old wiring. The roof leaked slightly near the back office. Funny enough, seeing that leak made me smile. Because it reminded me of the original warehouse years earlier. Maybe rebuilding always starts ugly. I stood inside that empty building for nearly an hour the first day holding a set of keys in my hand. No employees. No clients. No guarantees. Just possibility. And for the first time in a while, I felt alive again. That same afternoon, I called Tyler. He used to manage regional operations at Carter Logistics before Daniel took over. Smart guy. Reliable. One of the few employees I genuinely trusted. When he answered, he sounded surprised hearing my voice. "You okay?" he asked immediately. "Working on it." Silence. Then he lowered his voice slightly. "Things are bad here." I leaned against the warehouse wall quietly. "How bad?" "Different." Different. Interesting word. Apparently Daniel had transformed the company culture almost overnight. More meetings. More image-focused decisions. More pressure. Less trust. Tyler explained that Daniel became obsessed with visibility and authority after taking full control. Every office suddenly displayed motivational slogans and photos of Daniel shaking hands with clients. Managers had to submit detailed loyalty reports. Loyalty reports. Even hearing those words made me uncomfortable. Fear-based leadership always reveals insecurity eventually. Strong leaders build trust. Weak leaders monitor it constantly. "You still there?" Tyler asked. "Yeah." Then after a long pause, I finally said it. "I'm starting something new." Silence. Then unexpectedly, "When do I start?" I actually laughed for the first time in weeks. "You serious?" Completely. That moment mattered more than Tyler probably realized. Because betrayal isolates people emotionally. It makes you question your judgment, your instincts, your value. Having somebody believe in me again helped more than I can explain. Over the next month, things moved slowly, painfully slowly. Tyler joined first. Then another former employee reached out privately asking if rumors about my new company were true. Then another. And another. Apparently Daniel's leadership style was getting worse fast. He micromanaged constantly, took criticism personally, made emotional decisions during meetings. Employees started feeling like they worked for a brand instead of a business. And people can sense the difference quickly. Meanwhile, my tiny warehouse slowly came back to life. Used desks, cheap equipment, second-hand forklifts. Nothing glamorous. But every little step reminded me who I used to be before all the politics and corporate nonsense consumed everything. One night, Tyler and I stayed late organizing inventory shelves ourselves. At around midnight, he suddenly stopped and looked around the warehouse smiling. "This feels familiar." I laughed quietly. "Too familiar." "No," he replied. "Better." I frowned slightly. "How?" "Less fake." That word stayed with me. Maybe somewhere along the way, Carter Logistics stopped feeling real too. The bigger it became, the more politics entered everything. Influence. Power struggles. And Daniel thrived in that environment because appearances mattered deeply to him. But me? I missed simplicity. Real work. Real trust. Around that time, I started hearing rumors about Daniel everywhere. Most weren't good. Apparently, he spent huge amounts of money rebranding parts of the company almost immediately after taking control. Luxury executive renovations. Expensive marketing campaigns. High-profile networking events. On the surface, everything looked successful. But underneath, cracks were forming. One former employee told Tyler privately that Daniel barely listened during operational meetings anymore. He focused almost entirely on growth projections and public image. That's another dangerous mistake insecure leaders make. They chase looking successful instead of being stable. And eventually reality catches up. A month later, I saw Daniel publicly for the first time since losing the company. Business conference downtown. I almost didn't recognize him. Perfect tailored suit. Luxury watch. Confident smile. He looked exactly like the kind of executive magazines love featuring. And watching people surround him praising his visionary leadership honestly made me sick. Because none of them knew the truth. Or maybe they didn't care. That's another painful lesson I learned. Success covers a lot of ugly behavior temporarily. After the event ended, I was walking toward the parking garage when I heard someone behind me. "Ethan." I turned slowly. "Daniel." Up close, he looked different than he did on stage. More tense. Like someone constantly performing confidence instead of actually feeling it. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. He glanced around awkwardly before speaking. "You look better." Interesting. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "How are you?" Just observation. "I'm working," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I heard." Of course he heard. People talk. Especially in business circles. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then Daniel suddenly said something unexpected. "You know this didn't have to happen." I stared at him in disbelief. "What?" "If you'd trusted me more." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the manipulations sounded unbelievable. "You forged documents. You forced my hand." There it was again. Nothing was ever his fault. That mindset fascinated me honestly. How does someone betray family while still seeing themselves as justified? The answer came to me later. Entitlement. Daniel genuinely believed he deserved what I built. And once people convince themselves they deserve something, they stop viewing their actions clearly. "You could have built your own company," I said quietly. "I helped build yours." "No," I replied instantly. "You helped manage it." That hit him harder than I expected. His expression tightened immediately. Interesting. Even after stealing everything, he still needed validation. Still needed recognition. "You always underestimated me," he muttered. "That's not true." "Yes, it is." For the first time, real emotion cracked through his polished executive mask. "You never treated me like an equal." I stared at him carefully. Because deep down, I think he truly believed that. Not logically maybe. Emotionally. And emotional beliefs can become more powerful than facts. "You know what your problem is?" he asked quietly. "What?" You think because you suffered more building the company, it belongs to you completely. I almost answered immediately, then stopped. Because honestly, I did believe that. Because sacrifice matters. Risk matters. Sleepless nights matter. Commitment matters. But Daniel viewed ownership differently. In his mind, emotional contribution mattered just as much as actual sacrifice. And that mindset eventually became poison. You know the difference between us? I said carefully. What? I wanted to build something. I paused. You wanted to become someone. His face changed instantly, like the sentence hit a nerve he didn't want exposed. Then he smiled coldly. Enjoy the small warehouse. And just like that, the mask returned. He walked away toward his car without another word. But the conversation stayed with me for days afterward. Because underneath all the arrogance, I saw something else. Insecurity. Massive insecurity. Daniel wasn't enjoying success. He was chasing relief from feeling inadequate. And those two things are completely different. Meanwhile, my company slowly kept growing. Not dramatically. Just steadily. 3 clients became 7. 7 became 12. Nothing huge financially yet. But enough to survive. Enough to prove something important to myself. I still knew how to build. One evening, while reviewing invoices alone at the warehouse, Tyler walked into my office holding his phone. You should see this. I frowned. What? He handed me the phone silently. It was an interview. Daniel speaking on a business podcast. At first everything sounded normal. Growth strategies. Leadership. Expansion plans. Then the interviewer asked about Carter Logistics history. And Daniel smiled before saying, the company really evolved once I stepped into leadership. I felt something cold move through my chest instantly. Not anger exactly. Something heavier. Because he wasn't just stealing the company anymore. He was rewriting history completely. Like the 15 years before him barely mattered. Tyler watched my reaction carefully. You okay? I looked back at the screen quietly while Daniel continued talking confidently about his vision. Then I said something that surprised even me. He's scared. Tyler frowned. What? Daniel. I pointed at the phone. He's terrified. And suddenly I understood everything clearly. All the image obsession. The rebranding. The interviews. The constant need for recognition. None of it came from confidence. It came from fear. Fear that people would eventually realize the company's success existed long before him. Fear that without the title he'd still feel invisible again. And people driven by fear eventually make reckless decisions. I just didn't realize yet how reckless Daniel was about to become. After that podcast interview, I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's face. Most people listening probably heard confidence. I heard panic. There's a certain energy people carry when they're trying too hard to prove themselves. Once you notice it, you can't unsee it anymore. And Daniel suddenly carried that energy everywhere. Every public appearance. Every interview. Every social media post. It all felt forced. Like a man desperately trying to convince the world he belonged somewhere he secretly felt unworthy of. Meanwhile, life inside my small warehouse slowly became real again. Not exciting. Not glamorous. The kind of real I hadn't felt in years. I started waking up early naturally again. Coffee before sunrise. Checking delivery schedules. Reviewing invoices. Solving actual problems instead of sitting through endless executive meetings about branding and perception. Funny enough, losing the company reminded me why I built one in the first place. Not for status. For freedom. For purpose. One morning I arrived before everybody else and stood near the loading dock watching sunlight come through the warehouse doors. The building still smelled like dust and machine oil. Half the shelves were empty. The office furniture didn't even match. But standing there, I felt something I hadn't felt during my final years at Carter Logistics. Real pride. Not because the warehouse looked impressive. Because it was honest. Around 8 that morning, Richard stopped by unexpectedly. He walked slowly through the warehouse looking around quietly. Then he smiled. This reminds me of your first building. I laughed softly. Hopefully with fewer roof leaks. You know what I mean. Yeah. I did. The energy felt different here. No fake corporate culture. No executives pretending to be visionaries while employees secretly hated coming to work. Just people trying to build something together. Richard and I spent most of the morning discussing potential contracts. Nothing finalized yet, but serious conversations. Real opportunities. And every new opportunity felt like proof that Daniel hadn't actually destroyed me. He just removed me from something I created. There's a difference. At one point Richard suddenly stopped talking and looked at me carefully. You know Daniel called me last night? I frowned immediately. What did he want? He asked if I was working with you. Interesting. Then what? Richard leaned back slightly. He sounded nervous. That didn't surprise me. Daniel always feared losing influence more than losing money. Influence mattered deeply to him because influence made him feel important. What else did he say? Richard hesitated for a second. He blamed you for everything. Of course he did. People who refuse accountability eventually turn blame into survival instinct. If something failed, somebody else caused it. If people left, they were disloyal. If relationships collapsed, others misunderstood him. That mindset protects the ego temporarily, but eventually it destroys reality completely. After Richard left, I stayed in the office thinking about Daniel for a long time. And honestly, for the first time since the betrayal happened, I started feeling something unexpected. Not anger. Distance. Emotional distance. Like part of me finally understood that Daniel's actions said more about him than they did about me. That realization brought strange peace. Not complete peace, but enough. A few days later, Melissa contacted me privately. Melissa worked in financial oversight at Carter Logistics for years. Careful. Quiet. The kind of employee most executives overlooked because she didn't talk much during meetings. But people like Melissa notice everything. When we met for coffee, she looked tense immediately. You need to be careful, she said quietly. With what? Daniel's watching everybody. I frowned. What does that mean? He thinks employees are leaking information to you. I almost laughed. Are they? Melissa gave me a look that answered everything. Apparently Daniel's paranoia inside the company was getting worse fast. Managers were being questioned constantly. Departments monitored more aggressively. Employees pressured to report concerns directly to him. Fear was spreading through the company culture. And fear changes workplaces quickly. At first people stay quiet. Then morale drops. Then trust disappears. After trust disappears, collapse usually follows. He's making emotional decisions now, Melissa continued. What kind of decisions? Big ones. That answer worried me immediately. Daniel always chased appearance over stability. And emotional leaders become dangerous during stressful periods because they confuse dramatic action with effective leadership. What's happening? I asked. Melissa lowered her voice slightly. He's expanding too fast. Apparently Daniel signed several expensive growth projects almost simultaneously. New facilities, luxury office upgrades, aggressive market expansion, all while existing operations were becoming unstable internally. Classic insecurity. When people feel uncertain inside, they often overcompensate externally. Bigger titles, bigger purchases, bigger risks. Anything to silence the insecurity temporarily. But temporary silence isn't confidence. It's distraction. That same week, Tyler told me several former employees wanted to leave Carter Logistics quietly. At first I felt guilty hearing that. I didn't want people risking their careers emotionally because of loyalty to me. But apparently it wasn't about loyalty anymore. It was about environment. People are exhausted over there, Tyler explained one evening while we organized shipping schedules. He doesn't trust anybody. That sentence stayed with me. Because people who betray others eventually start expecting betrayal everywhere themselves. They project their own mindset onto everybody else. And eventually paranoia becomes unavoidable. One afternoon, I got invited to an industry networking event downtown. At first I considered skipping it. I still hated walking into rooms full of people who knew what happened. But Tyler convinced me. You need visibility too, he said. Visibility. Funny word. I used to think good work spoke for itself. Now I realized perception really does matter sometimes. The event took place in a luxury hotel ballroom filled with executives pretending not to compete with each other. The second I walked in, conversations shifted subtly. People noticed me immediately. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. A few genuinely happy to see me. Business circles love drama almost as much as success. For the first half hour, everything stayed polite. Awkward small talk. Industry updates. Careful questions nobody really meant. Then suddenly I spotted Daniel across the room. Surrounded by people. Laughing loudly. Performing confidence again. But something felt different this time. He looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like maintaining the image was starting to exhaust him. For a second our eyes met across the ballroom. And instantly his smile faded slightly. Interesting. He recovered quickly and kept talking to the group around him, but I noticed something important. He watched me constantly after that. Not openly. Subtly. Like he was checking whether people respected me more than him. And honestly, that realization made me sad more than angry. Because imagine living like that. Constantly measuring yourself against everyone around you. Constantly needing reassurance that you matter. That sounds exhausting. Later that evening, an older business owner named Harold approached me near the bar. I heard what happened, he said quietly. I nodded politely. Then he surprised me. You know the funny thing? What? Everybody respected the company because they trusted you. Those words hit deeper than he probably realized. Because for months I'd been wondering whether Daniel was right about something. Maybe people only respected the title. Maybe the company itself created authority. But hearing someone say otherwise mattered. A lot. Harold sipped his drink slowly before continuing. Your brother doesn't understand something important. What's that? You can buy visibility. He paused. But you can't fake trust long term. That sentence stayed in my head all night. Because deep down, I think Daniel already feared that truth himself. Toward the end of the event, Daniel finally approached me directly. No audience this time. No performance. Just us standing near the parking entrance while people slowly left around us. You look comfortable, he said quietly. I am. He studied me carefully. That surprises me. Why? Because I took everything. There it was again. Power. Ownership. Control. Daniel genuinely believed external success determined personal worth completely. And honestly, maybe I used to believe that too. But losing the company changed something inside me. You took a company, I replied calmly. That's not everything. His expression tightened slightly hearing that. Interesting. I think part of him expected me to stay broken forever. Maybe my recovery threatened him more than my anger ever did. You're rebuilding, he said carefully. Yes. With ex-employees. Some people prefer trust over fear. That hit him immediately. You think I lead through fear? I just looked at him silently. Sometimes silence answers better than words. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Daniel suddenly asked, Do you know what people say about you? I frowned slightly. What? They say you're obsessed with me. I almost laughed from disbelief. Projection. Pure projection. You spent years planning against me, I said quietly. And now you think I'm the obsessed one? His jaw tightened instantly. I built that company too. No, I replied calmly. You joined something already moving. That sentence landed hard. Because beneath all the arrogance, Daniel's biggest insecurity was always contribution. Deep down, he knew the company existed before him. And no amount of titles could erase that reality. You always acted superior, he muttered. No. I shook my head slowly. You just always felt inferior. The moment those words left my mouth, I knew they hit something dangerous. His entire expression changed instantly. Cold, sharp, wounded. And for a split second, I saw real hatred underneath everything else. Not business rivalry. Not frustration. Hatred. The kind that grows slowly over years of comparison and resentment. Then just as quickly, the mask returned. Daniel smiled thinly. You should be careful. That caught my attention immediately. Is that a threat? No, he replied softly. Just advice. Then he walked away toward the parking garage without another word. I stood there for a long time afterward thinking about what just happened. Because something about that conversation bothered me deeply. Not fear exactly. Recognition. For the first time, I realized Daniel wasn't simply trying to win anymore. He was trying to protect an identity he built around victory. And people become dangerous when losing feels like personal extinction. A few days later, the first public cracks finally appeared inside Carter Logistics. Small at first. Delayed supplier payments. Operational complaints. Rumors about internal instability. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to create whispers. And whispers spread fast in business, especially when confidence already feels fragile. That same evening, I saw Daniel post photos online from some expensive rooftop restaurant downtown. Perfect suit. Perfect lighting. Perfect smile. But staring at the image, I noticed something most people probably missed. His eyes looked exhausted, like a man desperately trying to convince himself he still had control. And honestly, for the first time since all this started, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The first real sign that Carter Logistics was in trouble came quietly. No dramatic headlines. No massive scandal. Just small problems appearing one after another like cracks spreading through glass. Clients started complaining about delays. Long-time suppliers became harder to reach. Managers suddenly stopped returning calls promptly. In business, instability usually whispers before it screams. And people who understand companies can feel when something is wrong long before the collapse becomes public. One morning Tyler walked into my office holding a printed article. You've seen this? I took the paper from him slowly. Carter Logistics had announced a major expansion project. 3 new regional facilities. Massive investment. Aggressive growth strategy. I stared at the article for several seconds before laughing softly. Not because it was funny. Because it was insane. There's no way cash flow supports this, I muttered. Tyler nodded immediately. That's what I thought too. Daniel was moving too fast. Way too fast. And I knew exactly why. He wasn't building carefully anymore. He was performing success publicly. That's the dangerous thing about insecure leadership. Eventually the image becomes more important than reality. And once that happens, bad decisions multiply quickly. Around that same time, Melissa started feeding me more information privately. Nothing illegal. Nothing confidential enough to cross lines. Just observations. Patterns. Warnings. Apparently Daniel barely slept anymore. He micromanaged every department personally. He rewrote reports at midnight. Called emergency meetings constantly. Changed strategies every few days. Employees were emotionally exhausted. And the worst part? Nobody felt safe disagreeing with him anymore. Fear had fully replaced trust inside the company culture. That always ends badly. Boys. One evening Melissa called sounding unusually nervous. You need to hear this, she whispered. I stepped outside the warehouse immediately. What happened? He's borrowing heavily. My stomach tightened instantly. How heavily? A lot. Apparently Daniel started taking massive financial risks to sustain the company's expansion image. Loans. Aggressive projections. Investor promises. All built around future growth instead of current stability. Classic desperation disguised as confidence. What's he trying to prove? Tyler asked later after I told him. I thought about that carefully. Then answered honestly. Himself. Because deep down, I don't think Daniel cared about the company anymore. Not really. The company became symbolic. Proof. Validation. Evidence that he mattered. And when identity becomes tied completely to success, people start making emotional decisions instead of rational ones. That same week, something happened that genuinely shocked me. One of Carter Logistics' oldest clients contacted me privately. This client had been with the company almost since the beginning. Back when I still drove deliveries personally. We met for lunch quietly at a small restaurant outside downtown. The second he sat down, he looked uncomfortable. "I'm going to ask you something directly," he said. "Okay. Is your brother stable?" That question honestly caught me off guard. What happened? The client sighed heavily. He exploded during a meeting. Apparently Daniel completely lost control during a negotiation after someone questioned operational timelines, raised his voice, accused people of disloyalty, stormed out halfway through discussions. I sat there quietly processing everything, because emotionally unstable leadership creates ripple effects fast, especially in industries built on reliability and trust. "He wasn't like that before," the client added carefully. He wasn't. At least not publicly. That's the thing about pressure. It exposes whatever already exists underneath. And underneath Daniel's confidence, fear was growing rapidly. Over the next month, my own company kept improving steadily. Still small compared to Carter Logistics, but healthy, focused. That calmness mattered more than I realized at first, because businesses absorb leadership energy. When leaders panic, employees panic. When leaders become paranoid, trust disappears. And when leaders chase ego over stability, everyone eventually suffers. Meanwhile, Daniel kept escalating. More expansion, more publicity, more expensive branding campaigns. And every public appearance felt more artificial than the last. One night I watched another interview he gave online. The host praised his bold leadership transformation of Carter Logistics. Daniel smiled confidently while explaining his vision for modern growth. But then the interviewer asked a simple question. "What's been the hardest part of taking over?" And for just 1 second, Daniel froze. Tiny pause. Barely noticeable. But I noticed. Because suddenly the polished image cracked slightly. Then he smiled again and gave some rehearsed answer about pressure and responsibility. But I recognized that look instantly. Real fear. Because despite everything he stole, deep down, Daniel still knew something terrifying. He didn't actually know how to build what I built. He only knew how to inherit it. A few days later, Tyler rushed into my office looking tense. "You need to check your email." I opened my laptop immediately. Inside was a formal notice. Legal complaint from Carter Logistics. My stomach dropped instantly. Daniel was accusing my new company of client interference and employee poaching. I read the document twice before laughing in disbelief. "He's panicking," Tyler muttered. "Exactly. Because stable people don't attack emotionally unless they feel threatened." And the truth was finally becoming impossible for Daniel to ignore. I wasn't disappearing. I was rebuilding. And worse for him, people were following me willingly. That reality probably terrified him more than lawsuits ever could. My lawyer reviewed everything later that afternoon and shook his head. "This is weak." "So why file it?" "To intimidate you." That sounded exactly right. Daniel wanted pressure. Distraction. Anything that restored psychological control. But something had changed inside me during those months. Earlier in life, this kind of attack would have emotionally crushed me. I mostly felt tired, because eventually betrayal burns through anger and leaves clarity behind. I finally saw Daniel for what he really was. Not some mastermind villain. Not some evil genius. Just a deeply insecure man trying desperately to outrun his own feelings of inadequacy. And honestly, that realization made him less frightening. One rainy afternoon, my mother visited unexpectedly again. She looked exhausted, like someone carrying emotional weight too heavy for too long. "How's your brother?" I asked carefully. Her eyes lowered immediately. Not good. Apparently Daniel barely visited family anymore. When he did, he spent most conversations distracted or defensive. My father tried discussing business concerns recently and Daniel exploded emotionally. Accused everyone of doubting him. Then left halfway through dinner. "He's angry all the time now," my mother whispered. I looked away quietly. Because deep down, I think Daniel believed success would finally heal his insecurities. Instead, it magnified them. That's another dangerous truth about ambition. If someone feels empty before power, they often feel emptier afterward. Because external success can't repair internal identity problems. My mother studied me carefully for a moment. You seem calmer. That surprised me. Because inside I still carried pain every day. But maybe she was right. Maybe rebuilding slowly gave me perspective. I think I finally accepted reality, I admitted quietly. And what reality is that? I thought carefully before answering. That Daniel was competing with me for years while I thought we were family. Saying it out loud hurt. Because it was true. And some truths feel heavy no matter how much time passes. A few weeks later, everything started accelerating quickly. Rumors spread that Carter Logistics was struggling financially. Then several senior employees resigned almost back to back. Then one of Daniel's expansion projects stalled publicly. Investors began asking questions. And suddenly the confident image Daniel built started cracking everywhere. Business communities can sense weakness fast. Once confidence disappears, people start reevaluating everything. That same evening, Daniel called me unexpectedly. I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity won. What? I answered flatly. Silence for a second. You're enjoying this? His voice sounded exhausted. Different. Enjoying what? The rumors. The pressure. Employees leaving. I leaned back slowly in my chair. You think I caused this? You wanted me to fail. Interesting. Even now, he still framed everything emotionally around himself. Not accountability. Not consequences. Just persecution. I wanted my life back, I replied quietly. You stole it. No, he snapped suddenly. I earned this. There it was again. That desperate need to justify everything. Like admitting wrongdoing would destroy him psychologically. You know what your problem is? He continued angrily. You never respected me. I closed my eyes briefly. For everything, we were still here. Still trapped inside the same emotional cycle. Comparison. Resentment. Validation. You didn't need my respect, I said calmly. You needed your own. Silence. Heavy silence. And for a second, I think he understood exactly what I meant. Then immediately anger returned. You think you're better than me? No, I answered quietly. I think you spent your entire life afraid you weren't. That hit him hard enough that he hung up instantly. I stared at the silent phone afterward for a long time. Not triumphant. Not satisfied. Just sad. Because beneath all the lawsuits and power struggles, this was still my little brother. The kid who used to ride in delivery trucks with me years earlier laughing about stupid things. And somehow that kid disappeared inside ambition, insecurity, and resentment. Or maybe he was always hiding there underneath everything. I honestly still don't know. A few days later, the first major public scandal finally hit Carter Logistics. A financial report leaked online showing serious operational losses tied to Daniel's expansion strategy. Industry news exploded immediately. Articles. Speculation. Investor concern. The company's stock value dropped sharply within days. And for the first time since stealing the business, Daniel couldn't control the narrative anymore. Reality had finally become public. That night, I sat alone inside my warehouse office after everybody left. Rain tapped softly against the windows while I stared at old shipping schedules spread across the desk. And honestly, I expected to feel victorious. But I didn't. Because watching someone destroy themselves slowly isn't satisfying when you still remember loving them once. Especially when part of you realizes the collapse was avoidable. Daniel could have built his own success. His own identity. His own life. He spent years chasing someone else's reflection until it consumed him completely. Once the financial report leaked, everything changed fast. Too fast. That's the thing about public success built on unstable foundations. From the outside, collapse looks sudden. But internally, the damage usually started long before anybody noticed. And now people were finally noticing. Business blogs started questioning Daniel's leadership openly. Industry analysts criticized the expansion strategy. Investors demanded explanations. Clients became nervous. Employees started updating resumes quietly. The polished image Daniel spent years building was beginning to crack publicly, and once that happens, panic spreads quickly. A week after the leak, Tyler walked into my office holding his phone with this strange expression on his face. "You're not gonna believe this." I looked up from my laptop tiredly. "What now?" "Daniel fired 3 department heads yesterday." I frowned immediately. "Why?" Tyler laughed softly without humor. "Because they disagreed with him." Of course they did. That's what insecure leaders do when pressure increases. Instead of adapting, they search for enemies. Instead of accepting mistakes, they remove people who remind them of reality. Apparently the meeting turned ugly. One executive questioned the company's financial direction. Another warned that rapid expansion was becoming dangerous. Daniel reportedly exploded emotionally and accused them of undermining leadership. By the end of the day, all 3 were gone. Fear inside the company intensified immediately afterward. And fear destroys businesses quietly. Employees stop sharing honest feedback. Managers stop reporting problems accurately. Everybody focuses on survival instead of solutions. That environment becomes toxic fast. Meanwhile, my own company kept moving steadily forward. We weren't growing explosively, but we were growing correctly, carefully, intentionally. And honestly, that mattered more to me now than fast success ever did. One afternoon I stood near the loading dock watching employees joke while unloading shipments. Simple moment. Nothing dramatic. But suddenly I realized something important. People felt relaxed here. I hadn't seen that atmosphere at Carter Logistics in years. Not during the final years anyway. Somewhere along the way, pressure and politics replaced trust entirely. And maybe I allowed that too. Maybe I became so focused on growth that I ignored emotional culture until it was too late. That realization humbled me. Because Daniel wasn't the only one who made mistakes. Mine just looked different. A few days later, Melissa contacted me again, sounding more nervous than usual. "He's unraveling," she whispered immediately. My stomach tightened. "How bad?" "He barely sleeps. He screams at people constantly now." Apparently Daniel had started holding random late-night meetings demanding updates from exhausted employees. Managers were terrified. Departments blamed each other for failures. Nobody trusted anybody anymore. And underneath all of it, financial pressure kept getting worse. "Why doesn't the board stop him?" I asked. Melissa hesitated. "Because they're scared too." That answer honestly said everything. Fear had infected the entire company structure. And fear-driven systems eventually collapse under pressure. Boys. One evening around midnight, I got a call from an unknown number. At first I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Silence. Heavy breathing. Then finally, "You think you won?" "Daniel." His voice sounded terrible. Exhausted. Frantic. "I never wanted this," I said quietly. "That's a lie." "It's not." He laughed bitterly. "You're enjoying watching me fail." I rubbed my forehead tiredly. "Daniel, you did this to yourself." "No," he snapped instantly. "You poisoned people against me." Interesting. Even now, reality still bent emotionally around his ego. If employees lost trust, somebody manipulated them. If investors panicked, somebody betrayed him. Nothing could simply be consequences. Because accepting consequences requires accepting responsibility first. And Daniel still couldn't do that. "You know what your problem is?" he continued angrily. "You always needed to be the hero." That accusation caught me off guard. "What?" "You loved being the responsible one." I stayed silent. Because honestly, there was some truth there. Not about heroism maybe. But responsibility became part of my identity long ago. The dependable brother. The builder. The stable one. Maybe I carried that role so naturally that I never noticed how heavily Daniel compared himself against it. "You could have built your own life," I said quietly. "I tried." "No," I replied carefully. "You tried to become me." Silence. Long silence. Then suddenly his voice changed. Softer. More honest. You have no idea what it felt like growing up beside you. That sentence lingered heavily, because for the first time, I heard real pain underneath the anger, not manipulation. You were always enough for Dad, he whispered. I closed my eyes slowly. There was the wound beneath everything else. Not business. Not money. Validation. Years of comparison buried underneath ambition. And honestly, that realization hurt more than I expected. Because maybe Daniel spent his entire life feeling second place emotionally. But instead of confronting that insecurity, he let it grow into resentment. You should have talked to me, I said quietly. What would that change? Everything. But deep down, I knew it probably wouldn't have. People drowning in insecurity rarely ask for help honestly. They usually hide behind ego instead. Eventually the call ended without resolution. Just silence. And after hanging up, I sat alone in the office thinking about childhood memories for a long time. Little things. Basketball games. Family dinners. Road trips. Mom praising my grades while Daniel stayed quiet. Dad asking me to help with responsibilities more often. At the time, those moments felt normal. But I wondered how differently Daniel experienced them internally. Not enough to excuse betrayal. Never that. But enough to explain parts of it maybe. A week later, another major blow hit Carter Logistics publicly. One of the expansion facilities failed inspections badly enough to delay operations indefinitely. News spread fast. Investors panicked harder. Clients started pulling contracts quietly. And suddenly the company's stability looked genuinely fragile. That same afternoon, Tyler rushed into my office looking stunned. You're not gonna believe who just called. Who? Richard. I frowned slightly. What about him? He pulled his contract from Carter Logistics. That was huge. Richard represented one of the company's oldest and most reliable partnerships. Losing him publicly sent a dangerous signal to everyone else. Did he say why? I asked. Tyler nodded slowly. He said he doesn't trust leadership anymore. Leadership. Interesting word. Not operations. Not logistics. Leadership. Because eventually character affects business outcomes whether people admit it or not. One rotten culture decision at a time. One emotional reaction at a time. One trust violation at a time. Eventually the consequences become unavoidable. Later that night, my mother called crying. That instantly scared me. What happened? Your father and Daniel fought. Apparently things exploded during dinner after my father questioned some financial rumors. Daniel accused everybody of doubting him, then blamed the entire family for never believing in him properly. Same pattern again. Pain transforming into anger. Accountability transforming into victimhood. My mother sounded heartbroken. He's not himself anymore. I almost answered immediately, then stopped. Because honestly, maybe this was exactly who Daniel always was underneath the charm. Pressure just removed the mask finally. A few days later, I ran into an old employee named Sandra at a supply warehouse downtown. She looked emotionally drained. How are things over there? I asked carefully. She gave a weak laugh. People are scared. Apparently layoffs were starting quietly. Departments restructuring suddenly. Budget cuts everywhere. And Daniel's behavior kept getting worse under pressure. He thinks everybody's against him, she admitted softly. Paranoia. That's what happens when people build success through betrayal. Deep down, they expect betrayal back eventually. Because they understand the mindset too well themselves. That evening after work, I stayed late alone in the warehouse again. The building was quiet except for distant traffic outside. And honestly, for the first time in months, I finally admitted something difficult to myself. Part of me still wanted Daniel to apologize. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. I wanted him to finally look me in the eyes and admit what he did. But deep down, I think I already knew something painful. People who spend years justifying betrayal rarely confess cleanly. Because admitting the truth would force them to confront themselves fully. And that's terrifying. especially for someone like Daniel who built his entire identity around appearing successful and important. Around midnight, I finally shut down my computer and prepared to leave. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. I answered slowly. Silence. Then Daniel's voice. Very quiet this time. They're turning on me. No anger. No arrogance. Just exhaustion. I leaned against the desk silently. Who? Everybody. And suddenly, for the first time since all this started, he sounded afraid. Really afraid. Not of losing money. Not of lawsuits. Of exposure. Because deep down, I think Daniel finally realized something terrifying. The respect he stole was never truly his. And once fear replaces admiration, power starts disappearing fast. After that late-night phone call, I couldn't sleep at all. Daniel's voice kept replaying in my head. They're turning on me. For months he acted untouchable. Confident. Certain. Superior. But that call sounded different. For the first time since stealing the company, he sounded like someone realizing the walls around him were collapsing. And honestly, that realization scared me more than I expected. Because people become unpredictable when the identity they built starts falling apart. The next morning, Tyler arrived unusually early carrying coffee and bad news. Another client pulled out. I looked up slowly. Who? When he said the name, my stomach tightened immediately. It wasn't just any client. It was one of Carter Logistics' biggest regional contracts. The kind of account companies build entire quarterly projections around. That's gonna hurt them badly, I muttered. Tyler nodded. And apparently more are considering leaving. Momentum. That's what was happening now. Once enough people lose confidence publicly, momentum turns dangerous. Fear spreads faster than trust ever does. Over the next week, rumors exploded everywhere. Articles questioned Daniel's leadership almost daily now. Anonymous employee complaints started surfacing online. Former managers hinted at toxic work culture. Investors demanded answers publicly. And each new problem created 3 more. Meanwhile, Daniel kept trying to project confidence online. Photos. Interviews. Corporate statements. But now the image looked desperate instead of impressive. People can sense desperation eventually, especially when reality no longer matches the performance. One afternoon, Melissa showed up at my warehouse unexpectedly. The second I saw her face, I knew something serious happened. He's losing control, she said quietly. I closed my office door immediately. What now? Apparently, a major executive meeting turned into complete chaos. Board members questioned Daniel aggressively about financial losses. Instead of calming the situation, he lashed out emotionally. Accused people of betrayal. Claimed executives were sabotaging him internally. At one point, he apparently slammed documents across the table hard enough to shock everyone in the room. That's bad, I muttered. Melissa nodded slowly. People are scared of him now. That sentence stayed with me. Because there's an important difference between authority and fear. Authority inspires stability. Fear creates temporary obedience. And eventually fear always destroys loyalty. Boys. Later that evening, I sat alone reviewing shipping schedules when my phone rang again. Daniel. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. What? Silence. Do you think I'm crazy? The question honestly stunned me. Not because of the words. Because of the tone. He sounded exhausted. Like someone standing in the middle of ruins trying to understand how everything caught fire. No, I answered carefully. Then why does everybody act like I am? I rubbed my forehead slowly. Daniel? They look at me differently now. His voice cracked slightly near the end. And suddenly I realized something painful. He wasn't handling public rejection well at all. Because people like Daniel survive emotionally through validation, pension, recognition, respect. And once those things disappear, they start unraveling internally. You need to slow down, I said quietly. I can't. Why? Because if I stop moving. He paused, then whispered, I start thinking. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Because deep down, I think Daniel spent his whole life outrunning his own insecurities through noise, ambition, and performance. And now the distractions weren't working anymore. Reality was catching up. What are you thinking about? I asked softly. Long silence. Then finally, you. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. Comparison again. Always comparison. You know what the worst part is? He continued quietly. What? I still feel like I'm behind you. Those words honestly broke something inside me a little. Because even after stealing everything, even after becoming Sue, even after destroying our family and company, he still felt inadequate. That's how powerful insecurity can become when left untreated. It consumes everything. Success. Relationships. Nothing ever feels enough. You were never supposed to compete with me, I said quietly. But I was always competing with you. There was the truth. Raw and ugly. And maybe the saddest part of all this? I genuinely never knew. Not fully. Sure, I noticed jealousy sometimes. Small moments. Tension. But I never realized Daniel built his entire identity around comparison. And once someone does that, resentment becomes almost unavoidable. A few days later, things got even worse publicly. A leaked internal email revealed Carter Logistics was considering emergency restructuring due to financial instability. The news spread everywhere. Investors panicked harder. Employees started leaving faster. And suddenly Daniel's visionary leadership image completely collapsed. Now people openly questioned whether he was qualified at all. That kind of public humiliation destroys insecure people emotionally. Because if your identity depends on admiration, criticism feels like personal annihilation. Around that time, my own company finally landed a major regional contract. Nothing giant, but significant. Big enough that we officially became stable long-term. The entire warehouse celebrated that night. Pizza boxes everywhere. Music playing quietly. Employees laughing. Simple happiness. And standing there watching everybody smile, I realized something important. This environment felt healthier than Carter Logistics had felt in years. No fear. No ego. No performance. Just trust. At one point Tyler walked over holding a soda can and grinned. You know what's funny? What? We're happier now than when the old company was worth millions. I looked around slowly. And honestly, he was right. Because money doesn't create peace automatically. Culture does. Integrity does. Trust does. Those things matter far more than flashy success ever will. Around midnight after everyone left, I stayed behind cleaning up quietly. That's when the warehouse door suddenly opened. And Daniel walked inside. For a second I genuinely thought I imagined him. He looked terrible. Not physically exactly. Emotionally. Wrinkled clothes. Exhausted eyes. No confident executive energy anymore. Just tension. Heavy tension. Tyler noticed immediately from the back office and started walking toward us, but I shook my head slightly. It's okay. Daniel looked around the warehouse silently for several seconds. Then laughed softly without humor. So this is where everybody went. I crossed my arms slowly. What do you want? He didn't answer immediately. Instead he walked farther inside looking around at the shelves, desks, and loading area carefully. This place reminds me of the original warehouse. It should. Silence. Then suddenly he muttered, You rebuilt faster than I expected. Interesting choice of words. Not congratulations. Not respect. Just surprise. I know how to build, I replied calmly. That hit him immediately. I saw it in his face. Because deep down, that was exactly what terrified him most. He stole the company but couldn't steal the ability behind it. For a while neither of us spoke. Then finally Daniel looked directly at me. Do you know what people are saying about me? Yes. They think I'm failing. I stayed quiet. Because there wasn't much to say. Reality spoke loudly enough already. I worked harder than anybody, he said suddenly. That sentence caught me off guard. Because emotionally, I think he believed it. Maybe not in actual hours or sacrifice. But psychologically, Daniel spent years fighting invisible insecurity every single day. And in his mind, that struggle probably felt exhausting enough to justify everything. You worked hard proving yourself, I said carefully, but not building stability. His jaw tightened instantly. You always think you understand everything. No, I replied quietly. I just understand you better now. That sentence changed the atmosphere immediately. Something vulnerable flickered across his face for a second. Then anger returned to cover it. You know what? He snapped suddenly. I spent my entire life trying to earn respect while you got it naturally. That's not true. Yes, it is. His voice echoed through the warehouse now. You walk into rooms and people trust you immediately. He pointed at me angrily. You don't even realize how easy that made everything for you. I stared at him silently. Because honestly, maybe he was partly right. Some people naturally project stability. Others struggle constantly to feel seen. But instead of developing himself honestly, Daniel tried taking shortcuts through image and power. And shortcuts eventually collapse. You could have built your own identity, I said quietly. I tried. No, I answered carefully. You tried becoming important faster. That hit hard enough he looked away immediately. Silence filled the warehouse for several seconds. Then suddenly his entire posture changed. Smaller somehow. Less defensive. They're removing me. I frowned slightly. What? The board. His voice sounded empty now. They're voting next week. There was. The real reason he came. Fear. Pure fear. Because losing the CEO position wouldn't just mean losing power. To Daniel, it meant losing identity completely. What did you expect? I asked softly. He laughed bitterly. I expected winning to feel different. That sentence stayed in the air between us heavily. Because deep down, he finally understood. Stealing success doesn't heal insecurity. It amplifies it. And now everything he sacrificed for still left him empty. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then quietly, almost like a child admitting defeat, Daniel asked, "Why do people still trust you?" I looked at him carefully before answering. Because I never built relationships through fear. He stared at the floor silently. And honestly, for the first time since all this started, I think he finally realized the company was never the real thing people respected most. It was trust. And trust is the one thing betrayal destroys fastest. After Daniel left the warehouse that night, I stood there for a long time staring at the closed door. The entire conversation felt strange. Not because we argued. We'd been arguing for months. What felt strange was seeing fear finally replace arrogance in him completely. For the first time since stealing the company, Daniel looked small. Not weak physically. Emotionally small. Like a man realizing too late that everything he fought for still couldn't fix whatever was broken inside him. Tyler eventually walked over quietly. You okay? I nodded slowly. He's collapsing. Tyler glanced toward the door. Good. That answer surprised me a little. Not because Tyler was wrong. Because part of me wished I still felt that kind of simple anger. But I didn't anymore. Somewhere during all the chaos, my emotions changed from rage into something heavier. Sadness maybe. Not for the company. For my brother. Because watching someone destroy themselves slowly stops feeling satisfying when you understand the pain driving it. A week later, the board officially removed Daniel as CEO. The news spread through business circles almost instantly. Headlines described it as leadership restructuring. Funny how corporate language always tries making disasters sound professional. But everybody knew the truth. He lost control. The same control he betrayed family to obtain. And according to Melissa, the board meeting was brutal. Daniel apparently arrived convinced he could still save himself through confidence and persuasion. Instead, executives confronted him with financial losses, declining trust, employee turnover, and investor panic. One board member reportedly said, "You care more about appearing powerful than leading effectively." That sentence probably destroyed him emotionally. Because deep down, it was true. After the vote, Daniel reportedly sat silently for several minutes before leaving without saying goodbye to anybody. And just like that, the empire he stole disappeared from his hands too. The strangest part? When I heard the news, I didn't celebrate. I expected to. Honestly, I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Because revenge fantasies always imagine emotional satisfaction at the finish line. Real life usually gives you emptiness instead. That same evening, my mother called crying again. Not dramatic crying. The quiet kind. The exhausted kind. "He won't answer anybody," she whispered. Apparently Daniel locked himself inside his condo for 2 days after losing the CEO position. Ignoring calls. Ignoring messages. Ignoring reality. My father finally forced him to open the door earlier that afternoon. And according to Mom, Daniel barely looked like himself anymore. That image stayed in my head all night. Not the arrogant executive version. Not the manipulative strategist. Just a broken man sitting alone in an expensive apartment surrounded by the ruins of his own decisions. And honestly, that hurt more than I expected. A few days later, Melissa stopped by the warehouse with final paperwork connected to some remaining legal issues. After we finished discussing business, she hesitated awkwardly near the office door. "What?" I asked. She sighed heavily. "I think you should know something." My stomach tightened slightly. "What?" She looked uncomfortable. "He kept your photo in his office." I frowned immediately. "What photo?" "The old warehouse picture. The same picture I packed into my cardboard box the day I lost everything." For several seconds I genuinely didn't know what to say. "Why?" Melissa shook her head slowly. "I don't know. But deep down, I think I did. Because despite all the resentment, all the jealousy, all the betrayal, part of Daniel still idolized the version of us from those early years. Before comparison poisoned everything. Before ambition became identity. Before insecurity turned into resentment. That realization honestly broke my heart a little. Because it meant some part of my brother probably loved me the entire time. Just not enough to stop competing with me. And competition eventually destroyed whatever love remained. A month after losing the CEO position, Daniel disappeared almost completely from public life. No interviews. No social media. No networking events. Nothing. Business circles moved on quickly. That's another brutal truth about success. People celebrate you loudly, then forget you quietly. Meanwhile, Carter Logistics continued collapsing under restructuring efforts. Turns out replacing leadership couldn't magically fix years of instability overnight. Too much trust was already damaged. Too many employees already left. Too many clients already lost confidence. And honestly, watching the company struggle felt surreal. Because for years I thought Carter Logistics was permanent, untouchable. But nothing built on unstable foundations lasts forever. Not businesses. Not relationships. Not identities. Around that same time, my own company kept growing naturally. No dramatic expansion. No flashy announcements. Just consistent progress. And maybe because I'd already lost everything once, I stopped obsessing over growth emotionally. I focused more on people now. Stability. Trust. Things I used to overlook while chasing bigger goals. One evening after work, Tyler and I sat outside the warehouse eating cheap takeout while trucks unloaded nearby. "You ever think about taking Carter back?" he asked suddenly. I thought about that carefully, then shook my head. "No. Really? Really?" And surprisingly, I meant it. Because the truth is, Carter Logistics no longer felt like mine emotionally. Too much damage lived there now. Too many memories poisoned by betrayal. Sometimes rebuilding something new is healthier than reclaiming ruins. Tyler nodded slowly. "You changed." I laughed softly. "Yeah. You're calmer now." That part was true. Not because life became easy. Because pain forced perspective onto me whether I wanted it or not. Losing everything stripped away illusions. Especially the illusion that success automatically creates happiness. It doesn't. Not if your identity depends on it completely. A few weeks later, my father visited the warehouse alone. He walked slowly through the building, quietly observing employees working. Then finally he sat across from me in the office and sighed heavily. You know what I realized recently? What? I spent years admiring confidence more than character. That sentence surprised me, because my father rarely admitted mistakes openly. Daniel always sounded confident, he continued quietly. You sounded certain. I frowned slightly. There's a difference. I know that now. Silence settled between us for a moment. Then he asked carefully, Do you hate him? The question lingered heavily in the air. And honestly, I didn't know how to answer immediately, because hatred is complicated, especially when family is involved. Finally, I shook my head slowly. No. Are you sure? No, I admitted quietly. But I don't want to hate him forever either. My father looked relieved hearing that. And for the first time in months, I realized how deeply this entire situation damaged my parents too. They didn't just lose peace. They lost the image of their family. Watching your children become enemies probably feels like watching part of yourself fail too. Before leaving, my father paused near the office door. He called me last night. I looked up immediately. What did he say? He asked if you were happier without him. That question hit unexpectedly hard, because deep down, I think Daniel still viewed life through comparison even after everything collapsed. If I succeeded, he failed. If I healed, he lost. Like happiness itself was a competition. What did you tell him? I asked quietly. My father gave a faint sad smile. I told him peace and winning aren't the same thing. After he left, I sat alone thinking about that sentence for a long time. Peace and winning aren't the same thing. Daniel spent his entire life chasing victory, pension, recognition, importance. And somewhere along the way, he lost peace completely. That night, I drove past the old Carter Logistics headquarters for the first time in months. The building looked darker now, less alive somehow. Several executive floors were empty already. The massive company logo still hung outside, but it no longer felt powerful. Just heavy, like a monument to ego. I sat in my car watching employees leave for nearly 20 minutes. Then something strange happened. Instead of anger, I felt closure. Because for the first time since the betrayal happened, I truly understood something important. Daniel didn't steal my future. He destroyed his own trying to steal my identity. And those are two completely different tragedies. A few days later, I got a text message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. I never wanted to become this person. Daniel. I stared at the message for a long time. Then finally replied. Then stop becoming him. Several minutes passed. Then another message appeared. I don't know how. And honestly, that was the saddest thing he ever said to me. Rain started falling halfway through the drive. Soft at first, then heavier. Streetlights blurred across the windshield while I drove through the city toward the old warehouse. The original warehouse. The place where everything began. Funny how life circles back sometimes. Years earlier, that building represented hope. Two brothers trying to build something together from nothing. Now it felt more like a graveyard for everything we destroyed. When I pulled into the empty parking lot, Daniel's SUV was already there sitting beneath a flickering light near the loading dock. The warehouse looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Tired. Just like us. I stepped out slowly and walked toward the half-open metal door. Cold air drifted through the building carrying that same familiar smell. Old concrete. For a second, memories hit me so hard I almost stopped walking completely. Late nights unloading shipments. Broken heaters during winter. Cheap folding chairs covered in paperwork. Pizza boxes stacked in corners while we worked past midnight. Back when success still felt exciting instead of heavy. Then I saw Daniel sitting alone near the far wall on an old wooden crate. No expensive suit. No polished executive image. Just jeans, a dark hoodie, and exhaustion written all over his face. He looked up slowly when he heard my footsteps echo through the warehouse. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally he glanced around quietly and muttered, "Crazy how small this place looks now." I looked around too. Back then it felt huge. A faint smile crossed his face for barely a second. "Yeah, That tiny moment honestly hurt more than anger. Because for one brief second, it felt like my real brother was sitting there again. Not the CEO. Not the rival. Just Daniel. Then reality returned. I stayed standing while he remained seated staring at the floor. You lost the company, I said calmly. Daniel laughed softly without humor. You really don't waste time. I'm tired. So am I. Rain echoed against the metal roof overhead while silence settled between us again. Finally Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly and asked, You want to know the truth? I crossed my arms. That depends. The real truth. Part of me didn't want to hear it. Because explanations don't erase betrayal. Sometimes they just make the pain more complicated. But eventually I nodded. Daniel stared at the concrete floor for a long time before speaking again. I hated you when we were kids. The sentence hit instantly. Not because it shocked me completely. Because deep down, part of me already knew. You were smarter, he continued quietly. More responsible. Teachers loved you. Dad trusted you with everything. I stayed silent. You know what people used to call me? I didn't answer. Ethan's little brother. The bitterness in his voice sounded ancient. Like he'd carried it his entire life. At first I admired you, he admitted. Then eventually, I started resenting you. He laughed weakly. Every room we walked into, people noticed you first. I leaned against an old metal shelf quietly. You could have built your own life, Daniel. I know. Then why didn't you? That question hung heavily between us. Finally he whispered. Because I was scared. Not lazy. Not incapable. And honestly, that made everything even sadder. Scared of what? I asked quietly. Failing. He rubbed his face slowly. You took risks naturally. I didn't. That part was true. When I started the company years ago, everybody thought I was crazy. Including Daniel. Back then he mocked the idea constantly. Said it would fail within months. But once the business started succeeding, his attitude changed completely. I kept waiting for my own opportunity, he admitted. But it never came. So you stole mine instead? He winced slightly hearing the words out loud. I told myself it wasn't stealing. There was the justification. The story he built in his head to survive guilt. I convinced myself the company belonged to both of us, he continued quietly. The paperwork made that easier. I nodded slowly. I know about the paperwork now. Daniel looked surprised for a second, then ashamed. You really didn't know? No. He stared at the floor again. I thought Dad told you years ago. He didn't. Silence returned heavily. Then Daniel suddenly laughed bitterly. You know what's funny? What? Even after taking control, I still felt second place. That sentence explained everything. Because insecurity doesn't disappear through success. It follows people everywhere. No amount of titles can fix internal emptiness. I thought becoming so would finally make people respect me, he admitted. And? He looked around the empty warehouse slowly. You want to know the truth? Yes. It felt fake. That word echoed through the building. Because deep down, Daniel knew. Employees respected the position. Not him. Clients trusted the company history. Not his leadership. And the more he realized that, the more paranoid he became. The pressure started crushing me, he whispered. I didn't know how you handled it. I almost laughed sadly. You could have asked. No, he replied instantly. Because then you would have been stronger again. There was competition. Always competition. Daniel viewed vulnerability as weakness. And that mindset poisoned everything. You know the worst part? He asked quietly. What? I actually believed I could become you. Those words stayed with me. Because they revealed the deepest truth underneath all this destruction. Daniel didn't just want success. He wanted identity. And no matter how much money or power he gained, he could never become someone else internally. That's why everything collapsed. Not because he lacked intelligence. Because he lacked self-awareness. Rain hammered harder against the roof now. Daniel leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees. When the company started failing, he said slowly, I became angry at everybody. I noticed. I blamed employees, investors, clients. He paused. But really, I was angry at myself. For the first time all night, his voice sounded completely honest. No manipulation. No performance. Just honesty. You know something? He asked quietly. What? I never actually hated you. I frowned slightly. You spent years destroying my life. I know. Then what did you hate? Daniel looked up slowly. Myself beside you. That sentence hit harder than anything else he said. Because suddenly, the entire tragedy became painfully clear. This wasn't just greed. It was identity collapse. A man who spent his entire life comparing himself to someone else until resentment consumed him completely. And comparison is dangerous. Because when people constantly measure themselves against others, they stop building their own future. They start trying to steal someone else's instead. I'm sorry, Daniel whispered suddenly. The words felt strange coming from him. Almost unreal. I studied his face carefully. And for the first time in months, I believed him. Not because the apology fixed anything. Nothing could fix this. But because he finally sounded honest. Broken. Human. Not the fake executive character anymore. Just a deeply insecure man facing the consequences of his own choices. You hurt a lot of people, I said quietly. I know. Mom barely sleeps now. His eyes closed painfully. I know. You almost destroyed Dad financially. Silence. You destroyed yourself. That one hit him hardest. I saw it immediately. Because beneath all the lawsuits and scandals, Daniel finally understood the truth. He sacrificed everything chasing validation that never satisfied him. And now he had nothing left. No company. No reputation. No real relationships. Nothing. What happens now? He asked quietly. I thought about that carefully. Because honestly, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to walk away forever. Another part still remembered childhood memories too clearly. You need help, I said finally. Daniel laughed weakly. Therapy? Yes. You think talking fixes this? No, I admitted. But understanding yourself might stop you from destroying what's left. He looked away silently. Then after a long pause, I don't think I know who I am without competing. That sentence honestly broke my heart a little. Because some people become so obsessed with proving themselves, they never develop an identity outside comparison. And when comparison disappears, emptiness remains. Eventually Daniel stood slowly. I should probably go. Where? He shrugged faintly. Honestly, I don't even know anymore. For a second, he looked completely lost. Not dangerous. Not manipulative. Just lost. And somehow that was harder to see. As he walked toward the exit, he suddenly stopped. Without turning around, he asked quietly, Do you think you'll ever forgive me? Rain poured heavily outside while I stood there thinking carefully. Then finally I answered honestly, I don't know. Daniel nodded slowly. Fair enough. Then he walked out into the storm alone. And just like that, my brother disappeared into the darkness. Not as a powerful businessman. Not as a successful CEO. Not even as a villain. Just a broken man who spent his entire life chasing someone else's identity. Until it destroyed him completely. After Daniel left the warehouse that night, I stayed there alone for almost 2 hours. The rain never stopped. It crashed against the roof so loudly that sometimes it drowned out my thoughts completely. Honestly, I was grateful for that. Because my mind felt exhausted. For months I imagined revenge would bring closure. That exposing Daniel would heal something inside me. That watching him lose everything would somehow balance the pain. But standing there alone in that old warehouse, I realized something difficult. Pain doesn't disappear just because the other person suffers too. Sometimes it becomes heavier. Because once the anger fades, all that's left is grief. Grief for what happened. Grief for what relationships could have been. Grief for the version of people you thought existed. Around 3 in the morning, I finally drove home through empty streets. The city looked peaceful in the rain, almost innocent. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped thinking about business completely. No contracts, no lawsuits, no betrayal, just silence. When I got home, I sat in the dark living room staring out the window while memories kept replaying in my head. Daniel as a kid following me around everywhere. Daniel begging to ride in delivery trucks when we first started the company. Daniel laughing during those impossible early years when we barely made enough money to survive. Somewhere along the way, insecurity poisoned all those memories. Or maybe it hid underneath them the entire time waiting to grow. I honestly still don't know. A week passed after our meeting in the warehouse. Then too, Daniel disappeared completely. No calls. No messages. Nothing. Part of me worried about him. Another part felt angry at myself for still worrying. That's the complicated thing about family betrayal. Love doesn't shut off cleanly. Even after people hurt you deeply, part of your heart still remembers who they used to be. Meanwhile, life inside my company kept moving forward. Employees showed up early. Clients kept calling. New contracts slowly expanded our reach. The warehouse felt alive now. And every day, I noticed something different about myself. I wasn't chasing growth obsessively anymore. I stopped checking competitors constantly. Stopped caring about status. Stopped needing people to admire me. Losing everything changed my relationship with success permanently. One afternoon, Tyler and I were reviewing schedules when he suddenly looked at me and said, "You know you smile more now?" I laughed softly. "Do I?" Yeah. That honestly surprised me. Because internally I still carried pain every day. But maybe peace isn't the absence of pain. Maybe peace is finally stopping the war inside yourself. A few days later, my mother invited me over for dinner. First time in months the whole family sat together peacefully. Almost the whole family. Daniel's chair stayed empty the entire night. And nobody mentioned it directly. But everyone felt it. Like a missing piece too painful to touch. Halfway through dinner, my father suddenly looked at me quietly. "I owe you an apology." I frowned slightly. For what? For not seeing things sooner. The table fell silent immediately. My father rarely apologized. Especially emotionally. I kept thinking success meant stability, he continued quietly. I admired confidence too easily. I looked down at my plate silently. "Daniel always sounded certain," he said. "But certainty without character becomes dangerous." That sentence stayed with me deeply. Because he was right. Some people mistake confidence for integrity. But they're completely different things. Real integrity stays steady even when nobody's watching. Confidence can just be performance. After dinner, my mother hugged me longer than usual before I left. And as I drove home that night, I realized something painful. This betrayal didn't just break two brothers. It fractured an entire family emotionally. Maybe permanently. A month later, I finally heard from Daniel again. Not directly. My father told me he'd started therapy. Apparently he moved into a smaller apartment outside downtown and disappeared from business circles entirely. No more interviews. No more networking events. No more desperate attempts to prove himself. At first, I didn't know how to feel about that. Relieved maybe. Then one evening, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. From Daniel. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the envelope for almost 10 minutes before opening it. The handwriting looked shaky. Uncertain. Inside, the letter was surprisingly short. No excuses. No manipulation. No blaming. Just honesty. He wrote that therapy forced him to confront things he spent years avoiding. His jealousy. His insecurity. His obsession with comparison. He admitted that stealing the company never truly felt like victory. Only temporary relief. And temporary relief eventually collapsed into fear. Then near the end of the letter, one sentence hit me hardest. "I spent so much time trying not to feel smaller than you that I became smaller than myself." I read that line 3 times. Because honestly, that was the most self-aware thing Daniel had ever said. At the bottom of the letter, he wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to finally know the truth. No dramatic ending. No request to meet. Just truth. And strangely enough, that mattered. I folded the letter slowly and sat there for a long time afterward thinking about everything that happened. Then eventually I realized something important. Closure rarely arrives dramatically. No cinematic moment. No emotional victory speech. Sometimes closure is just understanding. Understanding what broke people. Understanding what broke relationships. Understanding that pain passed through generations silently until somebody finally faced it honestly. A year later, my company officially became profitable enough to expand into a second facility. Smaller than the original Carter logistics empire. But healthier. Stronger internally. And honestly, I preferred it that way. At the opening of the new warehouse, Tyler gave a speech thanking the team for surviving the difficult early months together. Employees applauded. People laughed. Music played quietly in the background. Simple happiness. Real happiness. Not performance. At one point during the event, I stepped outside alone for some air. Sunset painted the sky orange above the parking lot while employees talked and laughed behind me inside the building. And suddenly I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Not victorious. Peaceful. There's a difference. Victory is temporary. Peace stays quieter. While standing there, my phone buzzed with a text message. A known number. But I already knew who it was. Daniel. The message only said, I heard business is going well. I'm glad. I stared at the screen for a long time. No jealousy. No bitterness. No hidden competition. Just kindness. Simple. Human. And maybe that was progress. After several minutes, I finally replied. Thank you. Hope you're doing okay too. A few moments passed. Then another message appeared. Trying to become someone I don't hate anymore. I looked out at the sunset slowly after reading that. And honestly, for the first time since everything happened, I believed he meant it. People always ask whether betrayal changes you. The answer is yes. Completely. But not always the way you expect. Sometimes betrayal destroys innocence. Sometimes it destroys relationships. Sometimes it destroys identity. But sometimes, if you survive it honestly, it also destroys illusions. The illusion that success matters more than character. The illusion that winning creates peace. The illusion that power fixes insecurity. I used to think revenge meant making someone suffer the way they made you suffer. But I think real revenge is refusing to become bitter after they try to break you. Because bitterness keeps you emotionally chained to the people who hurt you. Healing sets you free. Daniel spent years chasing importance because he thought being admired would heal his insecurity. I spent years chasing success because I thought achievement guaranteed happiness. We were both wrong. Peace comes from knowing who you are when nobody's applauding. When nobody's comparing. When nobody's watching. And maybe that's the real tragedy of everything that happened. Two brothers spent years fighting over a company, when what we were really searching for was self-worth. One of us lost himself chasing it. The other almost lost himself protecting it. But in the end, neither money nor power mattered nearly as much as the thing we destroyed along the way. Trust. And once trust breaks, even winning can feel empty. That's the lesson I carry with me now. Not that betrayal destroys families. Most people already know that. The real lesson is quieter. If you spend your whole life trying to become more important than someone else, you may never become yourself at all. 5 years later, people still occasionally ask me about Carter Logistics. Usually younger business owners. Sometimes reporters. Sometimes entrepreneurs who heard fragments of the story and want to know what really happened. Most expect anger when they ask. Drama. Bitterness. A revenge story with a satisfying ending. But real life rarely ends as cleanly as people imagine. The truth is, time changes the shape of pain. What once felt sharp enough to destroy me eventually became quieter. Not gone. Just quieter. My company grew steadily over those 5 years. Nothing explosive. Nothing flashy. We expanded carefully. Built slowly. Focused on culture more than image. Trust more than speed. And funny enough, the slower we grew, the stronger everything became. Employees stayed longer. Clients trusted us deeply. Problems got solved honestly instead of hidden behind polished presentations. Turns out stability isn't exciting, but it lasts. Sometimes I walk through the warehouse early in the morning before everybody arrives. Same habit I had years ago. Coffee in hand. Silence everywhere. And every once in a while, I stop and think about how differently life turned out than I expected. Back then, I thought success meant becoming untouchable. Now I understand something much simpler. Real success is sleeping peacefully at night. That's it. No fear. No pretending. No constant need to prove yourself. Just peace. My parents changed a lot too after everything happened. Pain softened them, especially my father. He stopped worshiping confidence after watching where blind admiration can lead. These days, he talks more about kindness than achievement, more about character than status. Sometimes life teaches lessons too late, but maybe learning them at all still matters. As for Daniel, our relationship never fully returned to what it once was. I don't think it ever can. Some damage changes people permanently, but over time, the anger between us slowly faded into something quieter. Distance. Understanding. Cautious respect. We started speaking occasionally after his therapy began. Short conversations at first. Birthdays. Family dinners. Awkward holidays where everybody pretended the past wasn't sitting silently at the table with us. But little by little, something changed. Not trust completely. That takes longer. Maybe forever. But honesty started replacing performance. And honestly, that mattered more. Daniel eventually opened a small consulting business years later. Nothing huge. No flashy branding. No desperate need to look powerful. Just small companies needing operational advice. The first time he told me about it, he looked nervous. Like he expected judgment. "You built it yourself?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah." Then after a long silence, he quietly added, "It feels different this time." I knew exactly what he meant. Because when something truly belongs to you emotionally, you don't need constant validation from other people to enjoy it. One night after a family dinner, Daniel and I sat outside my parents' house watching the sun go down while everybody cleaned dishes inside. For a while neither of us spoke. Then suddenly he laughed softly. "You know what therapy made me realize?" "What?" "I never actually wanted your life." I looked at him carefully. "Then what did you want?" He thought about that for a long moment. Then finally answered, "I wanted to feel enough." That sentence stayed with me long after that night ended. Because honestly, I think most people understand that feeling more than they admit. The fear of being overlooked. The fear of feeling behind. The fear that somebody else matters more. Those insecurities exist quietly inside a lot of people. The danger begins when comparison becomes identity. That's when people stop building themselves honestly. They start measuring their worth through someone else's reflection. And nobody survives that peacefully. A few months ago, I found the old warehouse photo again while cleaning storage boxes. The picture showed two exhausted brothers standing beside a delivery truck covered in dirt and sweat. Both smiling like idiots. Both believing the future would only bring us closer. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not with anger. Not even sadness anymore. Just perspective. Because life is strange. The people who hurt us most deeply are often the same people who once mattered most deeply too. And sometimes both truths exist together painfully. If there's one thing I've learned from everything that happened, it's this. People don't destroy their lives all at once. They do it slowly. One insecurity ignored at a time. One resentment protected at a time. One dishonest decision at a time. Until eventually they wake up surrounded by consequences they no longer understand. But healing works slowly too. One honest conversation at a time. One accountable choice at a time. One peaceful day at a time. That's the part most people don't talk about enough. Healing isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It happens when you finally stop trying to win battles that already stole too much from you. And maybe that's why I no longer tell this story as a revenge story anymore. Because revenge was never the real ending. Understanding was. Not understanding the betrayal. I understood that part immediately. I mean understanding people. Understanding how insecurity grows. How comparison poisons love. How ego disguises pain. How success can become addiction when identity feels empty. And most importantly, understanding that peace and importance are not the same thing. Daniel spent years trying to become important. I spent years trying to become successful. But the older I get, the more I realize neither goal matters much if you lose yourself achieving it. Nowadays, when young entrepreneurs ask me for business advice, they usually expect strategies about growth, leadership, or money. Instead, I tell them something simpler. Protect your character more carefully than your ambition. Because ambition without identity becomes hunger. And hungry people eventually destroy everything around them trying to feel full. The funny thing is, if you met Daniel today, you probably wouldn't recognize the man he used to be. He laughs easier now, listens more, talks less about proving himself. Therapy didn't magically erase the past. Nothing can do that. But it forced him to finally face the parts of himself he spent years running from. And maybe that's the closest thing people get to redemption in real life. Not perfection. Just honesty. A few weeks ago, we visited the old warehouse together one last time before the building got demolished. The place looked ancient. Dust everywhere. Broken lights. Rust along the loading docks. We walked through the empty building quietly while memories echoed around us. Then near the exit, Daniel suddenly stopped and looked at me. You know something? What? I used to think you were stronger than me. I smiled faintly. And now? He looked around the warehouse slowly before answering. Now I think you were just more comfortable being yourself. That might have been the most honest thing he ever said. Because at the end of everything, that's really what this whole story was about. Not business. Not betrayal. Identity. One brother spent his life trying to become someone else. The other nearly lost himself trying to protect what he built. And both journeys hurt us more than we ever imagined. As we left the warehouse for the final time, Daniel paused near the old loading dock and quietly said, "I'm sorry for all of it." No excuses. No explanations. Just truth. And this time, I didn't need anything more than that. Because forgiveness doesn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it arrives quietly. After enough honesty. After enough time. After both people finally stop fighting themselves. We stood there for a moment watching workers prepare the building for demolition. Then eventually we walked away together. Not as enemies. Not completely healed brothers either. Just two imperfect men who finally understood something too many people learned too late. Your worth was never supposed to come from beating someone else. It was supposed to come from becoming yourself honestly.